Okay, so the ultimate thing that we want to be able to do when we've got all these other things in place is to enter what we would call the flow state or the zone. Okay, now for every single discipline there is a kind of like a kind of ultimate sort of performance state, whether it's mountain climbing, whether it's basketball, whether it's any sports, whether it's drawing. In music, it's exactly the same. Now, the person that studied this particular phenomena very broadly was this chap here, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who basically studied all these different kind of activities around the world and found that people that entered this flow state had the same characteristics and experiences that occurred. I'll just go very briefly through them. Number one, there were clear goals as to what they were actually trying to achieve. As a musician, that might be playing through a particular piece of Mozart or whatever. Number two, there was an immediate feedback to what they were actually playing. Their mind could actually sort of see what's coming and there was a feedback to it. Number three, there was a balance between the challenge set and the skill. So the challenge was difficult enough, but their skill was also enough to meet it. So there was just enough where they are finding it reasonably difficult, but not so difficult that they're struggling and failing. Number four, action and awareness merged together. So again, if you were performing, the whole action of playing and your awareness moves into the playing. It's almost like you become one unit, the body and the mind kind of unite with each other. Distractions are excluded. There is a really strong sense of just the focus on that one thing that you're doing. There was no fear of failure. It's almost like you could do absolutely anything and it's going to work really well. The self-consciousness disappears. Now, this is an interesting one. In my PhD research, I looked at how jazz musicians enter a kind of ecstatic states whilst they're actually playing. And this happens almost every single time. Almost every single jazz musician that was interviewed about these kind of states where they kind of transcend themselves felt that their sense of self actually disappeared and they kind of like became one with the actual music itself. Number 8, there's a sense of time distortion. It's almost like time disappears altogether. And number 9, the activity is an end in itself. There isn't an attempt to try to get kind of validation from the audience. There isn't an attempt to try to get some kind of like money or any reward from it. Basically, playing the actual music itself is the reward in itself. Now, there is a really good book on the flow by Mihai, which is worth looking at and goes into a great deal of research. But how do we actually get into this flow state? Well, if it was obviously very, very easy, everyone would do it. Kenny Werner, again, who I've mentioned, has probably done one of the most important books, I think, in terms of actually accessing what he calls the space, which is really the equivalent of the flow state itself. And this is something I want to demonstrate in a second on the piano, some of the kind of exercises and things that we can actually do. And this would be corresponding to any instrument itself. So I cannot tell you how useful I found Kenny Werner's approach to getting into the space or zone, which is why I want to just talk a little bit about it. There are a few aspects that you need to think about before you can do this. One of them is you do need to have practiced. When you actually get into the flow state, it requires that you have your kind of your technique down and the piece down as well. Getting into the flow state doesn't magically make the piece suddenly a lot better. What it is that once you've got the piece in your muscle memory or whatever you're playing, then you're able to kind of access a much more expressive and deep kind of part of yourself when you're playing. You also need to learn how to stay present. So a lot of, and I've seen this on a lot of different things, is to make sure that you breathe and get used to relaxing and just staying very present instead of thinking about, right, what am I going to do next? How am I going to get there? And all this kind of thing. Because once you stay present, and this can be through breath or even touch, you're not going to be accessing anxiety because, as I've said, anxiety is something that is to do with a kind of expectation of the future. When you root yourself in your body, whether it's to actually focus on your hands or your breath, you are rooting yourself back in the present And this is a really important thing. It kind of happens slowly anyway as you move into the space. Now there is another book called The Inner Game of Music, which a lot of people have heard of, which is also good. But Werner's approach, I think, is very interesting. On YouTube, if you type in the 4 steps, that actually gets you to him actually working with a variety of different musicians on all sorts of instruments, including vocals, guitar, violin. So this is not exclusively at all to do with the piano. I'm just demonstrating it on the piano. And what Werner is trying to get you to do is this. When people get very anxious about their instruments, when they go to actually touch the instrument, you can already see them tense up. So if I did this on the piano, and I was anxious, it's almost like the very touch of the piano, the approach of the piano, brings this kind of anxious state to me, and my fingers sort of tense up and all the rest of it, okay? Now what I really want to be doing is to actually be playing in a way like a child might sort of play the piano initially, where I don't actually care at all about what I'm playing, because what I want to be able to do is to play. I want to be able to play from that relaxed state where I don't care about what I'm doing and translate that feeling into then actually playing the pieces that I'm doing. And now to do this actually requires a number of steps, and it requires work. And it's one of those things where a lot of people that read Kenny Werner's book Effortless Mastery will go, oh yeah, that's a really good idea, but then not actually do what he says, which are the 4 steps towards the end of the book. And just to give you an example, the first step, which you would do every day, perhaps for 2 entire weeks, and this is on the piano, but we can replicate this on instruments and the vocals as well, which would again be making very relaxed sort of sounds that are natural, is to simply finger drop. So I have my fingers on the piano, and all I want to do is to stay completely present, almost watch my hand as if it's someone else's, and just allow my thumb to drop down. Now if I start getting anxious or thinking, well, this sounds silly or I shouldn't be doing this, then I have to take my hands back off the piano. Then I breathe very slowly, and I become aware of my fingers, and I bring it back to the piano. And when I can do that and I'm not worried, I will move to the next finger and do the same thing. Now, for people that are used to sort of like doing very competitive practice and trying to do everything, this is a very agonizing exercise, but I can absolutely assure you that if you get used to doing this exercise, this is the first one, moving up and down the 5 fingers and moving back down again. When you can do this, the next thing he suggests, again with the piano as one example, but you could do this on any instrument, that it's all adaptive. The drums, he does a whole thing on with the drummer as well, is to now just move my hands fairly randomly over the piano. And it doesn't matter what the sounds are, we're not trying to make nice sounds. What I'm trying to do is create a completely different relationship to this instrument, where I actually find it's pleasurable to play the thing. Like he says, like you would be stroking a dog, if you like dogs, or a cat, you want to have the same feeling when you play the actual instrument itself. You almost anchor this lovely state of relaxation into the instrument, whether you're bowing a cello or a violin or plucking a bass or whatever it is, or blowing a saxophone. There's a sense of complete relaxation. And this really does take conditioning, because you're used to bracing when you go to play your instrument a lot of the time. And as soon as you get into this thing of learning to relax, you can undo it very quickly. I can do this for ages, and then as soon as I go to play, I start tensing up again, okay? So you have to very, very slowly do it. And actually, once you've done that, there are other little exercises where you can play fast. Just playing random notes is another one, but what I'm trying to do is keep this, so when I come into playing my piece, I try to stay in that state, and when I come out of that state and I start thinking, oh actually I've got to prove myself, this doesn't sound good enough, or all of those kind of inner chatter things, I take my hands back off the piano, and I might go back to this exercise for a while and then try to play my piece again. And if I start again coming out of the zone, I have to breathe again. Now it takes patience, but this is one of the most valuable exercises I've done. You can't bypass things like the practice, and I think things like the values and the beliefs and all those kind of things are really, really important to analyse where you're coming from. But when it comes to the actual playing, not the pre, not the post, but actual, if you know that you can kind of click into a zone and you can come to your instrument, and actually when you put it up ready to play, whatever it is, that you can actually move into a kind of state of relaxation, and and it feels good to actually play the instrument, and you can move into this kind of state where you're able to perhaps just block out people initially and just get into that state, because once you get into the state, it's almost like you can then start really responding to the people in the audience. And if you know you can do that, you are in a really, really strong position as a performer. So I would highly recommend reading Kenny Werner's book, because actually within that, the flow state, I think that's probably one of the best things that you can do. But you need to do the exercises that are actually in it. So that is my take on the zone, really. There are all sorts of accounts of sort of playing in the zone and various disciplines. But I certainly find personally Kenny Werner's approach was the thing that actually allowed me as a jazz musician to actually start accessing that and understanding what it feels like without worrying initially about what the notes are that I'm playing.